Oh,
Hello,
hi.
well, hello, Wendy. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Wendy and I met through Facebook, and I have yet to hear her story, but her energy is radiating, so I cannot wait to get into her story. So, Wendy, I'm just going to hand the mic over to you. If you can share with us how the Jehovah's Witnesses came into your life, and then your story as a Jehovah's Witness.
Sure. I was born into the religion, the Jehovah's Witness religion. My grandmother became a Jehovah's Witness when my mom was a teenager, and my dad followed my mom. So I was the fifth kid out of eight kids, and we were all born and raised into the religion. Um, yeah, so I think like my earliest memories were very traumatic. My father was physically abusive to all of us, and a lot of yelling going on in the house all the time. And my mother was very meek. So there was no kind of protection from any of that toxicity that was going on inside the home at all times. And at the age of 4, I was sexually abused. That went on for a while. I did tell my mother about it. I remember being in a meeting and being so young, maybe like first grade. I remember this clearly that they were talking about how premarital sex is a sin, and if, then you will die at Armageddon. And as a 6-year old, I was like, this I've already had premarital sex. I did not realize the difference between consensual or what was, you know, even happening to me at the time, but I did know that it was wrong. So I remember telling my mother about it, and she just turned around and walked out of the room. And so I think from that point on, I felt there was something wrong with me. Uh, I carried a lot of shame and guilt for that for a long time. And it kind of, I think, as my life as a witness at that point, I really wanted to be good and do all of the things that they say are going to, you know, guarantee you everlasting life. But I also had this other part of me where I carried all this shame and guilt and all these questions. And
I,
so I kind of had
I'm
like,
sorry. I'm curious, was this
okay,
somebody in the organization, and did you tell your mom who it was? Or was it someone in the
I
family?
did tell. It was someone in the family, much older than myself. I did tell my mom who it was. I think maybe she just didn't know how to handle it. There's not the proper, you know, channels to go through. I don't know looking back at it now, I don't know if she had any tools to help her to deal with what I was telling her at the time. But this person was much older than me. They were 12, I was 4. Um, and I got baptized at the age of 12. And looking back at that now, I feel like that is so young. You can't um you can't understand the magnitude of a lifelong decision at the age of 12. I have kids now, and I'm like, one of my daughters is 15, and I'm like, there's nothing that at this point in her life, if she was to make a decision, that I would say, okay, this is it for the rest of your life. So I was baptized at the age of 12. That was, I we grew up in a bubble. I wasn't allowed to have any other friends outside of the organization. My best friend was a few years older than me, and she was the only friend that I was allowed to be around. So, as I mentioned before, my dad was abusive physically and also emotionally, and he would never like leave a mark. I did speak with some of the counselors at school about it. And every time that CPS was called to the house, they'd put us in a room with all of our siblings and our parents, and right in front of our parents, ask, does your dad hit you? And of course, we would say no because we were so scared of what was going to happen when they left. But when I turned 16, my dad actually beat me so severely that I had marks all over my face. I had a black eye. actually had bruising on my the bone on my under my eye, and so CPS took me out of the home at this point. And when my mom saw my face, she said, "Well, why did he do that to you? Did you tell him to?" At 16 years old, I remember that so clearly. Just the delusion and the, you know, above all else, her remaining meek and submission to him and to, is what she thought that she had to do. So when I was 16, CPS took me out of the home and I lived in several different homes, but I wasn't allowed to go to the Kingdom Hall. I wasn't allowed to be around my parents. There was a big investigation going on. I had to go to court. But at this time, the elders came and I was disassociated from the religion for that. I was not allowed. Nobody, everybody that I ever knew was not allowed to talk to me anymore. My siblings, they didn't talk to me anymore, even though they had been through physical abuse themselves.
So let me
Uh,
get this right. You were
that
you
was
were taken away and you were publicly reproved for being taken away because of the abuse for your dad?
yes,
That's
yes.
very interesting. What status did your dad have in the congregation?
My dad was not an active publisher at the time. He had been baptized when he was younger. But he was not an active member of the congregation. I remember him having an affair against my mother, and then then when he was ready to come back home, we all had to sit at the table with the elders where they explained why he was coming back home because it was my mother's choice to have the head of the family back with us because when he was gone it was like we can breathe, there's some peace, there's some kind of a little bit less it was not so fearful. My whole life was just based in fear from my very earliest memory, and even going to the meetings that were triggers me still sometimes meetings, but that was not a place of peace because throughout the meetings and all of the talk about, Armageddon, I felt like our family, because of all of this, the negativity, everything that's happened, there's something wrong with me because of the things that have happened to me. I was terrified of Armageddon. I was terrified of Armageddon. So I just remember being scared all the time and not being able to live up to that impossible standard. I didn't have any good examples of, what a normal family life would look like. And all of my cries for help, every time I talked to my mom, we just didn't talk about the abuse. But the one time that I tried to tell her about the sexual abuse, and she just turned around and walked away. That was, a cue for me that we don't talk about this stuff to anyone. Like we just everything is fine and we'll continue on just the way it is. Jehovah will take care of everything and that's it. But inside of me, it was not that way. I was very depressed. I slept a lot. I stayed a lot in my room. Um, I remember thinking about suicide a lot of times because I just felt like there was no escape. Um, and I remember when I was 12, when we had the meeting to be baptized, you have like a few meetings with an elder to see if you're ready. You're just regurgitating information that you've read. We're so good at that as practicing Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's easy. But having to be held to that for the rest of my life at that age, I feel was really unjust. So when I was 16, I was taken out of the home and I wasn't allowed to go to the meetings. I was in different foster homes. I started to see how other families operate and I never went back from that. I have had a few times where I met my husband in college, and we had a baby right away. We weren't married at the time. I remember that. Yeah. And I also got into addiction really bad. I was drinking and using some heavy drugs to because I had never talked about the pain. It was just something that or the what had happened to me as a child and how unjust it felt. And I just thought there was something wrong with me. I still had so much shame and guilt. And when I finally went to therapy and was able to talk about the sexual abuse, I was able to kind of separate that from who I am, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I was I really I held on to that as part of my identity. I still think I held on to, like, being different as part of my identity at that time. And this I'm 35 now. This was over, 15 years ago when I finally started no, not maybe 10 years ago when I finally told somebody else besides my mom about the sexual abuse. And, that person went on to be a ministerial servant. They went on to be like kind of they had an active Jehovah's Witness life, but they ended up passing away a few years ago of cancer. And before they passed away, they sent me a letter that said, I don't know if you remember, but when we were kids, I sexually abused you. And I've carried that with me my whole life, which kind of set me free because it validated my experience and it kind of helped me to move on from it as well. So I spent some time with a hypnotherapist after I got over the fear of that, meditation and all that being, demonic. I I spent some time with a hypnotherapist who helped me to go back to that event, those events, and to take out some of the emotional charge from them so that it's not still happening emotionally in my life today. Because there was times where, you know, I just felt so different. I still was crippled with depression and anxiety a lot of times. And I really just wanted to let go of that. But I also felt like no one was ever going to love me for who I was because if my family can never talk to me again, then who is going to ever really love me? You know, I had to learn how to love myself. And I'm still doing that. I'm still growing. I get stronger every day. I actually went to school to be a hypnotherapist. And so now I help other people to do the same thing. And I realize that we never arrive at this place where we're, you know, perfect. We're never going to get to the place where we don't have like emotional upsets, but having the tools to deal with them, the healthy tools, a healthy view of life and who I am. And that's where I really am today. I feel like this whole journey has led me to this place now.
Wow, what a story, Wendy. I'm blown away by so many different aspects of your life. I am so curious because you said you stopped going to the meetings after you got kicked out of your family's house due to the abuse. What then
Yeah.
happened between that 16-year-old girl that was in different foster homes to then when you got married and had kids? Did you reconnect with your parents? Did the congregation try to reach out to you again?
Ugh, there's so many things that's happened. So, when I got pregnant, my family was around a little bit. It was different than what I had wanted. Was a warm, loving environment with my parents. I have forgiven them, so that's a big step. I'll go through from our relationship then, how it's changed. So when I had my first daughter, um, they were around. I lived kind of around them, so I would see them sometimes. And when my daughter was about 1 years old, we moved to a different area that was about 8 hours away from my parents. And that was when we didn't hear from them anymore, or any of my siblings anymore. There was times when I lived there that I would see some of my siblings, and it all was like fine. And then once I moved here, the contact was completely cut off again. So it was like on again, off again, depending on what they were feeling or what they were told to do at the time. And I don't know what was the reasoning behind. Sometimes they can talk to me and sometimes they can't. So I had a second child, 4.5 years after I had our first daughter. And I invited my parents to come and visit me because I really wanted to heal that. It was hard for me sometimes I could see how, as being a parent, and remember my abuse happened at 4, and now I have a 4-year-old child, and all of these feelings are coming up for me at the time. And now I have another child, a baby, and I invited my parents to come and see me, and they did. And it was very awkward at first, and about 2 days into the visit, it started to feel a little bit better. I just wanted to heal the relationships, and then I get a knock on the door, and it's the elders of this. I have never been to this congregation out here where I live, but it's the elders, and my mom takes my baby, she lets them into my house, and she takes my baby and my 4-year-old into another room, and the elders sit me down on the couch. I had no idea what was going on. Looking back, I realized my mother told them to come to my house, right? So they come in, they sit me down, and they tell me that because if I love my children, I'll come back to the congregation and I'll leave my husband because then we'll be unevenly yoked. And if I don't come back at Armageddon, they will die and it will be my fault. And that's how the visit went. And I just remember sitting there, I'm shaking right now thinking about it, because I was still so young and I hadn't found my voice yet. I had never talked to anyone about the abuse that I had been through. Uh, I remember them leaving, I thanked them for coming and they left. And my parents, went back to their hotel or whatever they were staying at. And I called my husband and I was like, I can't, this is what just happened. And he called them and said, you cannot invite people to my house and have people come into my house, without telling us. They didn't tell me they were coming. I was completely blindsided. I had no idea this was going to happen. And then my parents didn't say goodbye and they left again, and we didn't talk again for a very long time after that. Again. So there's the abandonment again, and there's the pain, and I'm not doing it right. And I'm shaking. It's like very traumatic still, but shaking's a good way to get it out of your body. Like animals shake when they've had stress and then they get it, they feel better. So when I start to shake, I tell myself, okay, this is just a response that I'm having and it's okay. Um, so yeah, then I got to a very dark place because I had all those thoughts going on. I still didn't know who I was. I had all this trauma still inside my body, and then I reached out for help from various different therapists, and I finally found the um, the real deep healing with a hypnotherapist who
Wow,
helped me.
I I'm again, your story has so many incredible layers. The fact that your parents kind of just left without even saying anything to you, and the fact that the elders came and said that to you. I'm very curious, as your husband was never a believer, how is
No,
he how is he responding to all of this? And what was his reaction? Did he ever say anything to your parents? Did he ever say anything to the elders? Was he home when the elders came by? And how have your kids I mean, I know you haven't raised them in the organization, but have they tried to been curious about your parents?
Well, so I'm probably gonna give away more than I want to because that's okay. So let me rewind. Well, my kids, they know kind of I talk openly about a little bit about my childhood, protecting some of those like very deeper details, just that I was raised in a religion where it was, there was only one way. We could only have friends with people who are in the religion, and we had to go, talk to other people about the religion. And I expressed to them that, I asked them, how do they feel? I've never pressed upon them any type of religion. Sometimes one of my kids says, I want to go to church. So I'll take her to different churches sometimes, and just so she can experience different things. We do talk a lot about, being a good person and how that feels. My parents came back into my life a few years ago. And I told my mother, that whatever type of relationship that she's willing to have with me, whatever that looks like for her, that's okay with me. And I have to keep it at that. So that means, no talk about religion at all. Like that's one of my boundaries. They come and visit now, um, about once a year. And I said absolutely no, that they're never allowed to invite anyone over to my house ever again. And my mother's like, okay. And I think the shift happened was because my brother died a few years ago. And I think that shift happened after that. That's when we started to communicate a little bit more. It's not like a relationship where I call my mom and we talk every day or anything like that. And it's even different with my dad because there was never any acknowledgement of the physical abuse or sexual abuse or anything like that. It's just as if we're just moving on now. It's been all these years and they show up, they'll come here once a year for a few days and they stay at their place and I stay at mine and we'll see each other for dinner with the kids. And that is what our normal is now. I'm sure if they see this, then they won't be coming anymore. That's one of my fears. But it's not gonna help anybody to keep it inside anymore?
Has your dad acknowledged what he did?
No, never. My mother does. My mother will say things like, "I was a really bad mom," and I am the one now to be like, "Mom, you've always done the best that you can." I'm the one who's like, "You can't say things about yourself like that. You have to say, I did the best that I can." But I think I can't speak for her, but I think that she carries a lot of guilt and about everything that happened because she knows we talked again about the sexual abuse and we were able to have that discussion. um I've never talked to my dad about it. I don't think he knows. I don't know if he knows. I don't know what he knows. I don't know if he has a level of awareness to ever admit that he was physically abusive even with the evidence there. But that's okay with me now. It's okay.
Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. And then the other question I had was your husband. How did he respond to all of that was happening? I mean, you got married shortly after you entered college, you said, so you were like 20?
We got married when my first daughter was 3. So we had been together for about 4 years before we decided to get married. I wanted to make sure that I was making a decision that I could live with. I didn't want to rush into anything just because we had a baby didn't mean I had to be married, I felt. He has been extremely wonderful throughout all of this. Every, you know, thing that comes up that I remember, or if I'm having a moment, and even with my parents, he understands. Um, and even if he doesn't understand, he's just a loving presence in my life. So even when he told my parents, like, you cannot have people come to my house without asking us. He was very kind about it, you know? It was just a boundary, a clear boundary. This does not happen. Yes. One time, I think we did go to the Kingdom Hall together when my first daughter was very little. I remember going because it was the memorial, and my first daughter was little, and I remember them passing the wine, and I was sitting next to my brother, and he passed it right over me, and I was like, "Yeah, never gonna be good enough. Can't even pass the wine or the bread, but they don't know who I am, and that's okay with me."
That's the life of the Jehovah's Witnesses is, I think, the main core belief of every active Jehovah's Witness and inactive and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not good enough because you're never good enough. You're never gonna
Yeah.
perform at the
You're
level
never good
that
enough.
they want you. No,
I
it's
felt like
crazy.
that's programming. That is programming at the level
Yeah,
of who we are, and we have to,
yeah,
rise above that because everyone is good enough just to be loved and not to be abused and not to be scared all the time. You're worthy of that. You're worthy of living a happy, productive, and healthy life. We all are, and we can have that here and
absolutely.
now.
And you're worthy of love for just being. You don't have to actually do anything. And the fact that we always had to do things and then again, not being enough so that it's just like the unconditional love, there was zero of it. And
Yeah.
people in the organization, they don't even understand what unconditional love means. They talk about brotherly love, brotherly affection, and it's just a facade. It's a hoax, it's a fake, and it's a world that, we were in and entrapped in, and you don't really realize it until decades later after you've done work on yourself, and like you said, it's
Yeah.
an ongoing journey of self-love and self-discovery. It's never ending, and to some that people, that it's too scary for them, so they almost choose not to go down that path, and they play the victim role for a very long time, maybe up
Yeah.
until their death,
I
which is
did that
also
too.
mm.
Yeah. I
But
played the
so
victim too. Yeah.
okay,
Didn't help me at all. Yeah.
there and there's hope for everyone if they choose that path of healing and self-love. It's there for everyone to achieve and to access. So yeah, thank you so much for
Yes.
sharing your story, Wendy. I really appreciate your rawness, your vulnerability. Is there anything that you feel like you want to add to this story? I feel like you've touched so many different parts of your life.
I at this time I can't think of anything. Just that I'm really grateful that I don't have all those same feelings inside of myself anymore. Today, like you were just saying, like we do heal, and we are here for. I'm here for people who are wanting that for themselves, and I think that's how we get it is together. That's how we get healing and support and non-judgmental. That was what I found outside when I decided to let down some of my preconceived notions that weren't even put in there by me, that were instilled in me from birth. When I decided to look beyond that is when I was able to heal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you again for sharing your story and your vulnerability, your honest, your realness. I really appreciate that. I hope you
Thank you.
guys like this interview with Wendy. Until next time.